Welcome to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers, for dog trainers, or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend.
Episode 11, A Deeper Look, Positive Reinforcement Training.
I was looking at, so just going back to the list of things that we wanted to antithesis. So you talked about timing. I will say marker training and just like getting used to markers, it freaking helps timing as a dog trainer, as a dog owner. Learning marker work is the best for all timing. It allows you to see the little nuances of behavior that maybe you didn't see before. And also one thing I love about positive reinforcement and marker training is that sometimes you mark close approximations of a behavior, right? So the other day I had a session online with a client and they said, you know, they've tried all these different YouTube channels and stuff like that, and they couldn't get their dog to lay down. It literally took us a whole week to get the dog to lay down with a hand signal. And we had to do a couple of different close approximation rewards, right? So we would reward the dog for putting their head low. Then we'd reward the dog for putting their head lower. Then we'd reward the dog for putting their head even lower than that. And so we had to kind of break up the shaping of this down position into 4 stages, right? So that the dog would develop a desire to continue going into that down position. And then we were able to do it, right? We were able to do it. Luckily, we were able to shape it in like a very long session. However, it took about a whole week for them to be able to get the hand signal down, right? So it was a process. But that's one thing I really like about marker training. It will teach you close approximations. It will teach you how to break down shaping behaviors to a more in-depth than maybe just some basic lure reward training would. So I would definitely subscribe to learning marker training. What was some of the other stuff? We talked about conditioning. Yeah, we talked about conditioning.
Can I touch on this really quick? I'm sorry.
Please do. Yeah.
So when it comes to conditioning, I completely agree that people tend to underestimate just how important it is, or how much you have to do in terms of volume, repetitions to really hone this craft, not only from your perspective, but from the dogs, because they're the ones who need to perform under pressure of whatever the distraction is. So a great thing that I like to do, when you're working within your lessons, within each individual lesson, let's say, you're starting a dog very simple. If the dog is in the beginning of their program, let's say a 5-month-old puppy, I just got a call today, 5-month-old puppy, German Shepherd mix. So he's going to be, I can imagine he's going to be pretty easy to food train. When we move on to more advanced forms of training down the line, every now and again, I sneak in a little food lesson here and there. Or when I'm doing online lessons with clients, I'll give them their weekly homework. And one day I'll say, you know what, toss a little food lesson in there and head way back, like week 2 stuff, just drilling sits and downs with food. And it's just to, even if your dog progresses past this point, and you definitely need to work the higher levels of stuff. So, we've talked about the pyramid before, foundation's the most important because a pyramid works like, so the foundation's the biggest. You really drill it, really hammer it. It's important. It's invaluable for later forms of training. Now, you still need to actively and directly work these later forms of training, but here and there, sprinkle some foundational stuff in there. I think it pays huge dividends, because what ends up happening is the dog gets so focused and so efficient at this later stuff that they get a little sloppy with the basic food stuff. Yeah. So you really maximize this kind of like push and pull of the whole thing.
Right. No, I completely agree. I like the idea of sprinkling it in, right? It's just kind of like, just, throw some veggies in there. It's good for you. It's important. It's really important. Well, did you like that? You like that examples? It's one of those things that it's good for you. It helps the dog reconnect with those basic skills that he developed. On my input that I want to give for conditioning, and I tell a lot of clients, if anyone's ever worked with me, they hear me say this. And usually when I'm conditioning, there's always a certain level of productivity I want to get out of the dog. Right. So in my mind, very, very similar to how like a personal trainer might want their client to, okay, we are doing 10 reps of chest presses. Right. With my dogs, I have goals. So I'll say, this session, we're going to do 5 in a row. right? If that's too much for them, okay, at least we're going to nail 3 perfect ones in a row before this session is done. And so when we work with goals like that, 3 and then 5 in a row and then 10 in a row, right? Now conditioning is exponential, right? So within 1 week, it's so easy for me to get over 500 repetitions of a command if I work that way, right? Versus people won't even do 500 repetitions in a year with their dog on some commands, right? So conditioning and revisiting it and practicing it and getting the dog to do it in context and out of context, this is where the conditioning really, really comes into play. And that's one thing also, I don't, to kind of your point, to randomly throw in, a food work session. I also like throwing in food work sessions out of context, right? So like imagine like, your dog's sleeping on the couch and he's just minding his own business. Well, grab some food real quick, throw it in your pocket, tell that dog to come and sit for you. And he's going to be like, but we're not in training mode right now. You just come and sit. Well, the dog's going to come and sit. You give him a treat. Good boy. Let him go back to the couch. 2 seconds later, ask him to come to you. When he comes to you, give him a lot of food. So the cool thing is sometimes you can surprise the dog or sprinkle it in throughout the day where the dog actually looks forward to you randomly asking him to listen to him, right? Or to listen to you. So pretty fun. That was a great tip. What was the last one? We talked about distraction levels, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Anything you want to say on distraction levels?
Well, I think in terms of distraction levels, what you just talked about goes a very long way because the dog is always kind of keeping an ear out for you because he wants to earn that reward.
Yeah.
So another thing that I would say to that end is if you're going to be working this is more for our dog trainer friends who are listening to this. You ever notice if you have like a bespoke dog training room, after a few food lessons, you walk into the room, dog's immediately just on, like, all right, here we go. I know what's happening. So I think it's great for you, when you say like, not only hit them at various times throughout the day, but do it in different contexts too. Go to the backyard and do some and go here and there and do some. But also, if you're having a hard time motivating a dog for very long, consider making the food lessons shorter and more frequent throughout the day.
Yeah. Good point.
That's a cool way to keep their motivation levels up. And if you're working with a puppy, typically what I'll do if I'm working with a puppy is I'll do breakfast and dinner in the crate so that the dog can start building his potty schedule because we have to teach that too.
Right.
But as far as obedience, I'll do maybe 3 lessons a day and I'll do 2 with food or 2 with food as in treats and then 1 with his meal of lunch, which is his kibble. Just to get the lessons in, but you're not feeding the dog too much extra because one of those meals is his meal.
Right.
But yeah, I just wanted to toss that in there as a little additive for dog trainer friends. If the dog is building a context with that room, which we see that all the time.
Yep. They're like really good just in that room.
Yeah.
Just in that room.
Yeah. Then definitely branch out.
For sure. And I guess in learning environments, one thing that we always want to focus on in positive reinforcement techniques is we want to make sure that the learner has the proper environment to learn in, right? So, just imagine being a kid having to do your homework in the living room with your family watching TV. Like that's hard, right? And so many times in like group classes, this might be the case. Some dogs, they love the food so much, they are honing in and completely focused on that food. But there are some other dogs that they have doggy ADD and they're just bouncing off the walls a little bit. And it's hard to keep them. So in those scenarios, if you find yourself using food as a bribe, a lure that you're constantly have to redirect the dog back to you, try saying, how can we make this environment as undistracting as possible? So sometimes you might have to train in a bathroom with nothing else, right? Or you might have to train in the kitchen with the doors locked, or you might have to train, in the garage where there's nothing, right? Except you, which is the most interesting thing. So those would be some great practices to just kind of balance out those bad practices that a lot of people do. All right. Thank you for listening to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers for dog trainers or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend.
We'll see you next time.